Hello, my name is John Bannon. I'm an attorney and philosopher. In this video, I'm going to explain how superdeterminism destroys Buddha. So this video is what they failed to teach you in college philosophy class about the philosophy of the Buddha. Now, when I speak of superdeterminism, I'm referring to a very specific version of superdeterminism known as Hansonian superdeterminism. It's based on the 2020 physics proof by Swedish theoretical physicist Dr. Johan Hansen. And you can find it in the peer reviewed physics journal Physics Essays, Volume 33, Number 2, June of 2020. It's on pages 216 to 218. It is entitled Bell's Theorem and Its Tests, Proof that Nature is Superdeterministic, Not Random. So, Hansonian superdeterminism says that we live in three dimensions of space and one hidden static dimension of time in a fourth dimensional block universe. And the only thing in this block universe are particles. And these particles or events are set like pebbles in concrete through the static dimension of time. They don't move, they don't change, they're permanent, but they do create patterns through the static dimension of time that we describe as our logical mathematical laws of physics. So, under Hansonian superdeterminism, all events, whether in the past, present, or future, are all equally real, and they all presently exist in the static block universe. The reason you don't see the past and the future is because of your location in the static dimension of time. You're not located in the past or in the future locations of the static dimension of time. You're only located in one location of the static dimension of time where you experience the present moment for you. So, Hansonian superdeterminism is not classical superdeterminism, first posited by Dr. John Bell in 1985. And classic superdeterminism is based on hidden causal variables. However, Dr. Hansen proved that causation or physical causation or probabilistic causation is not real. And therefore, a Hansonian superdeterminism cannot rely on hidden causal variables. So, um, Hansonian superdeterminism completely falsifies Buddhism. And I'll list five main aspects of the Buddha's teaching. And I will explain to you how superdeterminism defeats that teaching and invalidates it. So, number five, karma follows you through rebirth. Under Buddhism, karma is an ethical law of cause and effect driven by volition, where intentional actions of body, speech, and mind create a causal continuity that determines an individual's future experiences across the cycle of rebirth. So, Buddhist teaching says that we are reborn in new bodies. And the explanation for how that could be is that consciousness is like an energy that ripples to a new body. And that's the continuity of consciousness from the dead body to the next body in the rebirth cycle. However, under Hansonian superdeterminism, this is impossible. The reason is that consciousness is actually a physical reality and an aspect of the static block universe. Because it's a physical reality, that means it cannot ripple its way to the next body. So, for example, if you consciously decide to move your arm movement is undeniably a physical reality. And because of that, your future arm movement must already exist in the future static dimension of time. But in order for your arm movement to exist, your conscious decision to move your arm must also exist and be predetermined in order for your arm movement to be predetermined. Now, the only physical thing that exists where our consciousness lies are brain particles. Brain particles are undeniably physical. And it must be that the arrangement and organization of brain particles through the static dimension of time is what leads to our predetermined conscious thoughts to predetermine future arm movements, for example, or other body movements. So it's a mystery as to how consciousness could be an immaterial experience, but it has to be predetermined and an aspect of the block universe because the arm movement is predetermined and it requires consciousness to be predetermined. Now, if I were to guess as to why consciousness has this immaterial quality, despite being a physical reality, I would say that if you think about the universe, it is described by logical mathematical laws of physics. And that's implying and telling you that physical reality, the block universe, is logic. So if the logic of particles in the block universe can have a reality, this physical reality we call the block universe, then a different form of logic could have its own form of reality. So the brain particles are complicated and arranged in such a way that they create a different form of logic, a logic I call the logic of the possible. And because the logic of the possible exists in the brain, it has to exist in a reality, it has to exist somewhere. And that's a different form of reality. And that's the reality we experience as this immaterial consciousness. Okay, number 4. Meaning of life is the cessation of suffering through the attainment of nirvana. Hansonian superdeterminism disproves this, however. Under Hansonian superdeterminism, potentials cannot be universal meanings of life. And the reason for that is because all the events in the universe, past, present, and future, are all equally real and they all presently exist. Then all the events in your life from birth to death exist in the block universe right now. So you 5 minutes ago still exists and is experiencing 5 minutes ago, and you 5 minutes in the future exists right now and is experiencing 5 minutes in the future. You just don't know about these because you happen to be in a different location in the static dimension of time. Well, this leads to the idea that every living human being has a what I call a block life. And essentially what that is an information packet through the static dimension of time of all your body particles, through all the events of your life. So all the events of your life are a permanent physical aspect of the block universe. And you can't change any of those things without cause and effect in physics. So it makes no sense to say to somebody, the meaning of life is potential X, when X does not appear in that person's block life. So to them, that's a meaningless statement. X can never appear in their block life because you can't change it, it's permanent. So it doesn't make any sense to them to say their meaning in life is potential X. Um, so the only universal meaning of life under Hansonian superdeterminism is the predetermined role our block lives play in the predetermined static block universe, which has been uh, predetermined and atemporally created pursuant to God's plan. So potentials like uh, eliminating suffering is it cannot be a universal meaning of life. For some people, um, they never attempt to eliminate suffering, or for babies, for instance, that are born without cerebrums, they're alive, but they never experience consciousness. So it's impossible that they could have a conscious experience of trying to eliminate suffering. So to them, it's meaningless to say the meaning of life is to eliminate suffering and attain nirvana. It doesn't exist in their block lives. So number four is definitely wrong under Hansonian superdeterminism. Number three, dependent origination. This is the Buddhist idea that physical reality is existentially dependent on, arising from other physical reality, ultimately being self referential and thus amounting to emptiness or nothingness. However, this is completely false under Hansonian superdeterminism. The universe is not in a state of constant becoming. And the reason is because there's no cause and effect in physics. So present events cannot become the next future event because there's no causation so that it could turn into the next future event. And therefore, there isn't this becoming. The universe is not a state of causal becoming at every moment, every present moment of time. It's a static block universe. Time is a static dimension. There is no causation or moving time. And its static dimension just exists from one end of the block universe to the other, from the heel beginning end, which we call the Big Bang, to the ultimate late end, which we essentially think of as heat death of the universe. The moreover, because there is no moving time in the block universe, there can't be without cause and effect in physics. Nothing can be caused to move in time without cause and effect in physics. That means there's no moving time, which means physical reality is not subject to moving time, which means it's timeless. And because it's timeless, then you can't annihilate or change the block universe once it has been created atemporally or outside of space-time by God. And the reason is because that would involve two non-simultaneous acts involving the block universe. That is the creation of the block universe and its annihilation or its changing. And those two non simultaneous acts would be a reference point for a duration of moving time, the time between these two acts. But that's an impossibility because the block universe consists of timeless physical reality, not subject to moving time because there's no cause and effect in physics. So there's no way that once the block universe is atemporally created by God, it can be annihilated or changed, which means the block universe is permanent. It's not going anywhere, and nobody, even God, can't get rid of it. Consequently, the block universe is not dependent on anything, even itself, for its own existence. Nothing can get rid of it. So it can't be dependent on anything. So this idea of dependent origination is it assumes dependence, and the block universe has no dependence. So this can't be correct. All right, number two, God, heaven, and hell are states of mind. However, under Hansonian superdeterminism, that is not true. God is necessary for the atemporal creation of the static block universe from nothing. Nothing cannot have the power to create a block universe without cause and effect in physics. So you need a God to create the static block universe. Now, atemporal creation of the static block universe has good arguments and evidence for it, but I'll give you one in particular, and that's uh, the standard model of particle physics, the idea that the universe consists of particles. So here's a particle, and you can ask yourself, what is a particle? Well, it's a boundary. It's a boundary between the particle and what is not the particle. So because it's a boundary, then it's contingent. And the reason is because it can't be a necessary being. A real particle, if it were a necessary being, would necessarily be everywhere else. But it's not. It's not here, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here, it's only there. Well, that means as a boundary, that proves it's not a necessary being. That means it's contingent on something bringing it into being. Now, that something can't be just a simple brute fact of its existence. Because if the particle existed as a brute fact, it just exists because it exists, then it would always exist eternally. But if it was eternal, then it would have to be necessary because nothing else could exist but it. But we already know it's not necessary because it doesn't exist in all these other places. So that can't be right. You could maybe argue that some sort of metaphysical mathematical structure atemporally creates the existence of this particle. But a mathematical structure would also uh, require that the particle exist always or eternally, because mathematics doesn't have an on-off switch. So if it's math that's causing this particle to exist, then again, the particle would have to always exist. It would be eternal, which means it would be a necessary being, which we know it's not. So that cannot be the case. So the only thing that can explain the atemporal creation of the particle is God. So it can't be a brute fact. It can't be some mathematical substructure of some sort. It's got to be a God. Uh, and because God would have to know of and understand everything that exists in the block universe in order to create the block universe with those things in it, then he would have to be supremely intelligent. So, for example, if you take some of the most advanced technologies in the universe, God would have to know and understand those advanced technologies beforehand in order to create the block universe, including those advanced technologies in the block universe. So, God would have to be supremely intelligent. God would also have to know everything because he would have to know everything that's possible to be created in physical reality, which by definition means you know everything. And his choice to create the block universe would have to be a freely willed choice because he has to have the power to choose what to create and what not to create. And that's a free choice, it's not a determined choice. So that requires a God. So Hansonian superdeterminism leads to uh, a, a belief in a real God. Heaven and hell, um, under the Christian Bible, are presented as real places, not states of mind. Now, God predetermined our universe, which means he predetermined the existence of Christianity in human history in the static dimension of time. Uh, One can reasonably infer that because Christianity is the predominant world religion in terms of numbers of members throughout history, that God intended Christianity to be his true message for humanity. I mean, why else would God make it the predominant religion about him? So, because the Bible, the Christian Bible says heaven and hell are real and they're real places, then you can reasonably infer that that's true. They're not states of mind, they're real places. And because we already know God can atemporally create a block reality, then it is entirely possible that God could create other special block realities unconnected to our universe called heaven and hell. And because uh, we are essentially information packets existing in the static dimension of time, God could simply copy and paste that information packet and place it in these other block realities in a block afterlife, whether in heaven or unfortunately hell for some of you people. So this is entirely possible under Hansonian superdeterminism. There is a God, and you can reasonably infer that there's a heaven and a hell, and they are real places. So Buddha was completely wrong in claiming that God, heaven, and hell are simply states of mind. Number one, no creator God. So, according to Buddhism, the god Brahma appeared first in a new world cycle, mistakenly perceiving himself as creator simply because he preceded other beings. But Buddhism itself does not subscribe to a creator God. When the gods are subject to impermanence, um, then they are not the source of the existence of reality or the universe. However, under Hansonian superdeterminism, there is definitely a creator God. There has to be, because our universe was atemporally created out of nothing, and nothing doesn't have the power to create without cause and effect in physics, which requires a supremely intelligent, uh, omniscient, free being that created our block universe. All right. Well, I hope you understand that Ansonian superdeterminism really takes Buddhism to task. And it has destroyed the Buddhist central teachings. So I'll give you a moment to look at the board and reflect on this. Okay, until next time, take care.